Captain Sarah Mitchell had always pushed boundaries. Even as a child growing up on her grandfather's farm in Kansas, she would climb the tallest trees and leap from barn roofs with makeshift wings fashioned from old bed sheets. Her mother would scold her for being reckless, but her grandfather understood something deeper about the girl's spirit. That child wasn't meant to keep her feet on the ground, he would tell anyone who listened. By 1942, Sarah had earned her commercial pilot's license and was among the first women accepted into the Women Air Force Service Pilots program. The WASP program allowed women to ferry military aircraft from factories to bases, freeing up male pilots for combat missions overseas. Sarah excelled immediately, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of aircraft that impressed even the most skeptical instructors. Her reputation for fearless flying began during a routine ferry mission from California to Texas. Weather conditions had deteriorated rapidly, with thunderstorms creating dangerous turbulence that grounded most pilots. Sarah volunteered to deliver a critical P-51 Mustang that was desperately needed at the training base. She navigated through the storm with such skill that the tower controllers later said they had never seen anyone handle severe weather with such precision and calm. Word of her abilities spread quickly through military aviation circles. Sarah became known for taking on the most challenging assignments that other pilots refused. She would fly experimental aircraft on their maiden voyages, test planes that had been damaged and repaired, and deliver aircraft in weather conditions that kept seasoned veterans on the ground. Her logbook filled with successful missions that others deemed impossible. However, Sarah's confidence sometimes crossed the line into what military officials considered dangerous showboating. During one ferry flight, she performed an unauthorized barrel roll over the airfield where her boyfriend was stationed, hoping to catch his attention. The maneuver was executed flawlessly, but it violated strict military regulations about aerobatic flying in non-combat situations. The incident that would change everything happened on a cold February morning in 1943. Sarah was delivering a B-25 bomber from the factory in Kansas to a base in Florida. The twin-engine aircraft was powerful and responsive, and Sarah felt completely at home in the cockpit. As she flew over her hometown, she decided to perform what she later described as a victory pass for the people below who had supported her aviation dreams. What started as a simple low pass over the town square turned into an impromptu air show. Sarah brought the bomber down to just a few hundred feet, the roar of its engines echoing off the buildings below. Citizens poured out of shops and offices to watch the magnificent aircraft thunder overhead. Emboldened by their enthusiastic response, Sarah pulled the bomber into a steep climb, then rolled it into a series of maneuvers that showcased both the aircraft's capabilities and her own exceptional piloting skills. The display was breathtaking to watch from the ground, but it was also completely unauthorized and extremely dangerous. Flying a multi-engine bomber at low altitude over a populated area while performing aerobatic maneuvers violated numerous safety regulations and military protocols. Sarah knew she was breaking rules, but in that moment, the pure joy of flying and the thrill of sharing that joy with others overwhelmed her better judgment. The consequences came swiftly. By the time Sarah landed in Florida, military officials had already received multiple reports of her unauthorized aerobatic display. A formal investigation was launched immediately, and Sarah found herself facing serious charges of reckless flying, endangering civilian lives, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The same boldness that had made her one of the program's most capable pilots had now branded her as a dangerous maverick who couldn't follow orders. The hearing was conducted with military precision and little sympathy for Sarah's explanations. Despite testimony from fellow pilots about her exceptional skills and safety record, the panel focused solely on her violation of regulations. They cited her pattern of pushing boundaries and argued that her unauthorized aerobatics demonstrated a fundamental lack of judgment that made her unsuitable for military aviation. The verdict was harsh but final. Captain Sarah Mitchell was permanently banned from all military flying duties. Her wings were stripped away, her commission terminated, and her dreams of contributing to the war effort crushed. The woman who had once been praised as one of the most naturally gifted pilots in the program was now persona non grata, banned from the very thing that gave her life meaning. Sarah returned to Kansas in disgrace, her reputation in ruins, and her future uncertain. The local newspapers, which had once proudly celebrated their hometown hero, now reported her downfall with a mixture of disappointment and embarrassment. Many in the community felt she had squandered an incredible opportunity through her own recklessness and poor judgment. For months, Sarah struggled with depression and a sense of purposelessness that seemed overwhelming. She took a job at a local diner, serving coffee and pie to farmers and traveling salesmen who occasionally recognized her as the disgraced pilot from the newspapers. The work was honest, but felt like a prison sentence for someone who had once soared through the clouds with complete freedom. Yet even in her darkest moments, Sarah never stopped thinking about flying. She would lie awake at night, mentally rehearsing flight procedures and dreaming of a day she might once again feel the controls of an aircraft in her hands. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but she also knew that her skills as a pilot remained undiminished by her poor judgment. What Sarah couldn't know was that half a world away, military planners were facing challenges that would soon make her a unique combination of exceptional flying ability and willingness to take extreme risks exactly what they desperately needed. The war was evolving in ways that required not just competent pilots, but aviators capable of missions that seemed impossible to accomplish and survive. In the spring of 1944, the war in Europe had reached a critical juncture. Allied forces were preparing for the massive invasion of Normandy, but intelligence reports revealed a troubling development that threatened to derail the entire operation. German forces had established a heavily fortified radar installation deep in occupied France that could detect the approaching invasion fleet from hundreds of miles away. The radar station was located in a valley surrounded by mountains, making it nearly impossible to attack with conventional bombing raids. Heavy bombers couldn't navigate the narrow mountain passes, and the facility was too well defended for a ground assault. Even more challenging, the installation had to be destroyed within a very narrow window of time to ensure the invasion's success, but without alerting the Germans to the impending attack. General Robert Hayes, chief of Allied intelligence operations in Europe, found himself facing an impossible puzzle. He needed someone who could fly a small, maneuverable aircraft through treacherous mountain terrain, deliver a precision strike against a heavily defended target, and escape without being detected. The mission required piloting skills beyond anything his current aviators possessed. During a late-night strategy session in London, General Hayes was reviewing personnel files when his aide, Colonel Thompson, mentioned an unusual report that had crossed his desk months earlier. It described a female pilot who had been banned from military service for performing unauthorized aerobatics, but whose flying abilities were described as extraordinary by everyone who had witnessed them. Intrigued, General Hayes requested Sarah's complete military file. What he discovered was a pilot whose technical skills and fearless approach to flying were exactly what his impossible mission required. Her violation of regulations, which had ended her military career, actually demonstrated the kind of bold decision-making that might be necessary for such a dangerous assignment. General Hayes consulted with General Patricia Williams, one of the few high-ranking female officers in the European theater who had maintained contact with several former WASP pilots. General Williams had heard stories about Sarah's flying abilities from other women in the program and confirmed that her reputation for exceptional skill was well-deserved despite her disciplinary problems. The two generals faced a difficult decision. Military protocol demanded that they use only active-duty personnel for classified operations, but their mission was so critical and so dangerous that conventional rules might need to be set aside. After extensive debate and consultation with their superiors, they received authorization to approach Sarah about participating in a top-secret mission. The approach had to be handled with extreme delicacy. Sarah's disgrace and bitterness toward the military meant she might refuse to help, even if her country needed her skills. General Williams volunteered to make the initial contact, believing that a woman-to-woman conversation might be more successful than a formal military recruitment. In early May 1944, Sarah was working the morning shift at the diner when a well-dressed woman in civilian clothes entered and requested a table in the back corner. The woman introduced herself as Patricia Williams and explained that she represented certain government interests that required discretion. Sarah initially assumed it was some kind of investigation related to her military dismissal and was prepared to be defensive and uncooperative. General Williams spent nearly an hour explaining the situation without revealing specific details about the mission. She described a critical need for a pilot with exceptional skills who could undertake a dangerous assignment that might help shorten the war. She acknowledged Sarah's past difficulties with military authority, but emphasized that this situation was different because it required someone willing to operate outside normal protocols. Sarah listened with growing amazement as the conversation continued. The woman across from her was offering a chance to redeem herself and contribute to the war effort, but the terms were unlike anything she had ever heard. There would be no restoration of her military commission, no public recognition of her service, and no guarantee that she would survive the mission. She would be operating completely outside official channels, with no support if things went wrong. The offer was both tempting and terrifying. Sarah had spent months wondering if she would ever fly again, and now someone was presenting an opportunity that sounded more dangerous than anything she had ever attempted. General Williams made it clear that she needed an answer within 24 hours, as time was running short for whatever operation they were planning. That night, Sarah walked for hours through the quiet streets of her hometown, wrestling with the decision that could determine the rest of her life. She thought about her grandfather's words about not being meant to keep her feet on the ground, and she realized that despite everything that had happened, she was still the same person who had dreamed of flying since childhood. The next morning, Sarah called the telephone number General Williams had provided and simply said, "I'm in." Within hours, she received instructions to travel to a remote airfield in Colorado, where she would begin preparations for an assignment that she still knew almost nothing about. The journey to Colorado felt like stepping into a completely different world. Sarah traveled under an assumed name with documentation that identified her as a civilian contractor working for an unspecified government agency. The other passengers on the train seemed ordinary enough, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched and evaluated every step of the way. The airfield in Colorado was unlike any military installation Sarah had ever seen. There were no visible signs identifying the facility, no standard military markings on the buildings, and no uniforms that indicated which branch of service operated the base. Everyone she encountered was polite, but revealed nothing about the purpose of their work or the nature of the missions being planned there. On her first morning at the facility, Sarah was introduced to General Hayes, who explained that she would be briefed on her mission only after completing an intensive evaluation of her flying abilities. The next few weeks would determine whether she truly possessed the skills necessary for an assignment that he described as more challenging than anything any pilot had ever attempted. The evaluation process was exhausting and exhilarating. Sarah flew multiple aircraft types in conditions designed to test every aspect of her piloting abilities. She navigated through simulated mountain terrain, performed precision maneuvers in aircraft she had never seen before, and demonstrated her capacity to remain calm under extreme pressure. With each passing day, Sarah's confidence returned and her skills sharpened. The months of frustration and self-doubt melted away as she rediscovered the pure joy of challenging flying. Whatever mission these people were preparing her for, she was determined to prove that her abilities exceeded even their highest expectations. After 3 weeks of intensive evaluation, General Hayes finally revealed the true nature of Sarah's mission. The briefing took place in a windowless room deep within the Colorado facility, with only the 2 generals and a handful of intelligence specialists present. Maps covered every wall, showing detailed topographical information about a region of France that Sarah had never seen before. The target was a German radar installation codenamed Eagle's Nest, located in a valley 40 miles behind enemy lines. The facility consisted of 3 massive radar towers and supporting buildings that were heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns and a garrison of elite German troops. Intelligence reports indicated that the installation could detect Allied aircraft from over 200 miles away, making it a critical threat to the upcoming invasion of Europe. General Hayes explained that conventional bombing raids had been ruled out because the valley was too narrow for large aircraft to navigate safely, and the surrounding mountains provided natural protection against high-altitude attacks. A ground assault would require weeks of preparation and would certainly alert the Germans to Allied invasion plans. The only viable option was a precision strike delivered by a single aircraft flown by a pilot with extraordinary skills. The aircraft selected for the mission was a modified P-51 Mustang that had been extensively altered for this specific operation. Engineers had removed all unnecessary weight, installed additional fuel tanks for extended range, and equipped the plane with specialized navigation equipment that would allow night flying in mountainous terrain. Most importantly, the aircraft carried a revolutionary new type of explosive device that could destroy the radar towers with surgical precision. Sarah studied the mission parameters with growing excitement and apprehension. She would take off from a secret airfield in England, fly across the English Channel at extremely low altitude to avoid detection, navigate through the French countryside using landmarks and dead reckoning, locate the target valley in darkness, deliver the explosive payload with pinpoint accuracy, and escape before German forces could respond effectively. The flight path required threading through mountain passes that were barely wider than the aircraft's wingspan, maintaining precise altitude control in complete darkness, and timing the attack to coincide with a brief window when the radar operators would be changing shifts. Any mistake in navigation, timing, or execution would result in either mission failure or Sarah's death, and probably both. Training for the mission consumed every hour of Sarah's days for the next month. She flew the modified Mustang in conditions that simulated every aspect of the actual assignment, practicing low-level navigation, night flying, and precision bombing techniques until the procedures became automatic responses. The aircraft handled differently than any plane she had previously flown, requiring adjustments to her piloting style and new understanding of its capabilities and limitations. The most challenging aspect of the training involved learning to navigate using only basic instruments and visual landmarks. The specialized navigation equipment installed in the aircraft was designed to supplement her natural piloting skills, not replace them. Sarah had to memorize dozens of geographical features along the flight route and practice identifying them from various altitudes and angles until she could recognize them instantly. Mock bombing runs were conducted against targets that replicated the radar installation's layout and defensive positioning. Sarah practiced approaching from different angles, adjusting for wind conditions, and delivering the explosive payload while maintaining the high speed necessary for escape. The margin for error was essentially zero, as the target area was too small to allow for multiple attack runs. Intelligence briefings provided detailed information about German defensive capabilities and likely response patterns. Sarah learned to identify different types of anti-aircraft weapons by their muzzle flashes, understand how searchlight operators would attempt to track her aircraft, and recognize the flight characteristics of German fighter planes that might pursue her during the escape phase of the mission. Physical conditioning became as important as flight training, as the mission would require Sarah to maintain peak concentration and precise motor control for over 6 hours of continuous flying. She worked with military fitness instructors to improve her endurance, strengthen the muscles used for aircraft control, and develop techniques for managing stress and fatigue during extended periods of high-pressure operation. As her training progressed, Sarah began to understand why the generals had sought her out despite her checkered military record. The mission required not just technical flying skills, but the willingness to attempt something that any rational pilot would consider impossible. Her history of pushing boundaries and taking calculated risks made her uniquely suited for an assignment that conventional military thinking would reject as too dangerous to attempt. The psychological preparation proved as demanding as the physical training. Sarah worked with military psychologists to develop mental techniques for maintaining focus during extreme stress, controlling fear responses that could interfere with decision-making, and preparing for the possibility that she might not survive the mission. The specialists helped her understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to function effectively despite being afraid. 3 weeks before the mission launch date, Sarah received devastating news that nearly derailed the entire operation. Intelligence reports indicated that the Germans had increased security around the radar installation and installed additional anti-aircraft defenses. The mission's already slim chances of success had dropped even further, leading some planners to argue that the assignment should be canceled as too risky. General Hayes called Sarah into his office for a conversation that would determine whether the mission proceeded. He laid out the updated intelligence honestly, explaining that the odds of her surviving the attack had dropped to what most experts considered unacceptable levels. He gave her the opportunity to withdraw from the assignment without any criticism or loss of honor, emphasizing that no one would question her courage if she decided the mission was too dangerous. Sarah spent that night walking alone around the Colorado airfield, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her grandfather's faith in her dreams, her disgrace and redemption, and the thousands of Allied soldiers whose lives might depend on the success of her mission. By dawn, her decision was clear. When she reported to General Hayes the next morning, Sarah's response was simple and direct. "When do we leave for England?" The general smiled and nodded, recognizing in her words the same spirit that had once led her to perform unauthorized aerobatics over her hometown. The difference now was that her willingness to take extreme risks would serve a purpose far greater than personal satisfaction. The final phase of preparation involved relocating to a secret airfield in the English countryside, where Sarah would spend her last days before the mission studying recent reconnaissance photographs of the target area and fine-tuning her aircraft for optimal performance. The countdown to what many believed would be the most dangerous solo flight in aviation history had officially begun. June 3rd, 1944, arrived with overcast skies and a persistent drizzle that made the secret airfield in Kent feel even more isolated from the outside world. Sarah had barely slept for 3 days, not from fear, but from the intense anticipation that comes before attempting something that will either succeed spectacularly or fail catastrophically. Weather reports indicated that conditions over France would be acceptable for the mission, with cloud cover providing additional concealment during the crucial phases of the flight. The pre-flight briefing began at 1800 hours in a converted barn that served as the operations command center. General Hayes reviewed the latest intelligence reports, confirming that German patrol patterns remained consistent with previous observations. The radar installation was operating normally, which meant the enemy had no indication that an attack was imminent. Most importantly, Allied forces in England were maintaining radio silence and normal activity patterns to avoid suggesting that anything unusual was planned. Sarah's modified P-51 Mustang had been wheeled out of its hangar and was being prepared by a team of mechanics who had worked on the aircraft since its arrival from Colorado. Every system had been tested and retested. Fuel tanks had been topped off with a special high-octane mixture designed for extended range, and the explosive payload had been armed and installed in the aircraft's modified bomb bay. The plane looked sleek and deadly in the fading daylight, like a predator preparing for the hunt. At 2,000 hours, Sarah completed her final equipment check and climbed into the cockpit that had become as familiar as her own living room during weeks of intensive training. The modified instruments glowed softly in the darkness, and the aircraft's engine responded with a smooth purr that indicated everything was functioning perfectly. Ground crew members performed their final inspections while Sarah ran through mental rehearsals of every phase of the upcoming flight. The takeoff was scheduled for 2,100 hours, which would put Sarah over the target area at 200 hours when German forces would be least alert and the radar operators would be in the middle of their shift change. Weather conditions were forecast to remain stable throughout the night, with enough cloud cover to provide concealment, but not enough turbulence to interfere with precision flying. At exactly 2,100 hours, Sarah received clearance for takeoff and pushed the throttles forward. The Mustang accelerated down the runway with tremendous power, lifting off smoothly into the dark sky above England. Within minutes, the lights of the airfield disappeared behind her, and Sarah was alone with her aircraft, her mission, and the knowledge that the next several hours would determine both her fate and the success of the Allied invasion plan. The flight across the English Channel was conducted at an altitude of less than 50 feet above the water, low enough to avoid German radar detection, but high enough to provide some margin for error if engine problems developed. Sarah maintained strict radio silence, navigating by compass heading and timing while keeping constant watch for German patrol boats that might spot her aircraft and report its presence to coastal defenses. Crossing into French airspace required even greater precision and caution. Sarah climbed slightly to clear coastal cliffs, then dropped back down to treetop level as she began following the carefully planned route through the French countryside. Navigation landmarks appeared exactly where intelligence reports had indicated they would be, allowing her to maintain precise course heading while adjusting for wind drift and minor timing variations. The first major challenge came 40 minutes into the flight over France, when Sarah encountered a German night fighter patrol that intelligence briefings hadn't predicted. She spotted the distinctive blue exhaust flames of enemy aircraft several miles ahead and slightly above her position. Following her training, Sarah reduced power to minimum sustainable settings, dropped even lower to use terrain masking, and altered course slightly to avoid crossing the fighter's patrol pattern. For 10 agonizing minutes, Sarah flew with enemy aircraft close enough to see, knowing that any mistake in her concealment efforts would result in a deadly air battle that she couldn't win while carrying her mission payload. The German pilots remained unaware of her presence, eventually flying away toward a different sector, but the encounter reminded her how many things could go wrong during the remaining hours of the flight. Navigation through the mountainous terrain approaching the target area tested every aspect of Sarah's flying skills and training. The modified instruments provided basic guidance, but success depended primarily on her ability to recognize geographical features in darkness and maintain precise altitude control while threading through valleys that were barely wide enough for the aircraft's wingspan. The landscape below became increasingly rugged as Sarah approached the target valley. Rocky outcroppings and steep hillsides created dangerous downdrafts and unpredictable wind patterns that required constant adjustments to power settings and control inputs. Several times, Sarah had to climb rapidly to avoid ridgelines that appeared suddenly in the darkness, then dive back down to maintain concealment from German radar installations in the area. At 0130 hours, Sarah spotted the distinctive geographical features that marked the approach to the target valley. Intelligence photographs had prepared her for the terrain, but actually flying through the narrow mountain passes in complete darkness was far more challenging than any simulation could replicate. The valley walls rose steeply on both sides of her aircraft, creating an optical illusion that made accurate altitude judgment extremely difficult. As Sarah entered the final approach phase, she could see lights from the German radar installation glowing softly in the valley below. The sight confirmed that she had successfully navigated to the correct target area, but it also meant that enemy personnel were awake and active despite the late hour. Anti-aircraft gun positions were visible as dark shapes around the perimeter of the facility, and searchlights swept back and forth in routine security patterns. The attack would require Sarah to approach the target at high speed, release her explosive payload with split-second timing, then climb rapidly out of the valley while German defenders try to track and destroy her aircraft. She would have only one opportunity to complete the mission successfully, as a second attack run would give the enemy time to coordinate their defensive response and make escape nearly impossible. At 0145 hours, Sarah began her final approach to the target. She pushed the throttles forward and dove toward the radar installation at maximum speed, keeping the aircraft low enough to avoid early detection, but high enough to clear obstacles in the valley floor. The modified Mustang responded beautifully to her control inputs, accelerating smoothly toward the moment when months of preparation would be tested in a few seconds of combat action. Searchlights suddenly blazed to life as German operators detected the approaching aircraft, but Sarah was already committed to the attack run. Anti-aircraft guns began firing, filling the air around her plane with explosive shells and tracer rounds that lit up the night sky like deadly fireworks. Sarah maintained steady course and speed, knowing that any deviation would throw off the precision timing required for the explosive payload to hit its target effectively. The release of the explosive payload happened in a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. Sarah pressed the bomb release at the exact moment her training had programmed into her muscle memory, feeling the aircraft suddenly lighten as the specialized weapon dropped away toward the radar towers below. Immediately, she pulled back hard on the control stick and applied full power, sending the Mustang into a steep climbing turn that would take her up and over the valley walls before German gunners could adjust their aim. Behind her, the night erupted in a brilliant flash of light as the explosive device detonated exactly where it was supposed to. The blast was far more powerful than Sarah had expected, creating a sustained fireball that illuminated the entire valley and sent shockwaves through the mountains as she could feel through her aircraft's controls. All three radar towers collapsed simultaneously, their massive steel structures crumpling like paper models in the face of the precisely engineered destruction. Anti-aircraft fire followed Sarah's aircraft as she climbed frantically out of the valley, but the explosion had temporarily blinded the German gunners and disrupted their coordination. Shells burst close enough to shake the Mustang violently, and Sarah heard metal fragments strike her aircraft, but nothing hit anything vital. Within minutes, she had cleared the mountains and was racing back toward France at maximum speed, leaving the burning remains of the radar installation far behind. The escape flight proved almost as dangerous as the attack itself. German forces throughout the region had been alerted by the explosion, and enemy fighters were scrambling from airfields across occupied France to intercept the mysterious attacker. Sarah flew at treetop level through valleys and forests, constantly changing course to avoid being tracked by the search aircraft that filled the night sky above her. Twice during the escape flight, German fighters passed directly overhead, their pilots scanning desperately for any sign of the aircraft that had destroyed such an important strategic target. Sarah's low altitude, flying, and frequent course changes kept her hidden, but fuel consumption was higher than planned due to the constant maneuvering required to avoid detection. By the time she reached the French coast, her fuel gauges showed dangerously low levels. The flight across the English Channel became a race against time and fuel consumption. Sarah reduced power to the minimum settings that would keep the aircraft airborne, then leaned a fuel mixture to squeeze every possible mile from the remaining gasoline. She calculated that she had perhaps 10 minutes of flying time remaining when the lights of the English coast finally appeared through the darkness ahead. Landing at the secret airfield required using emergency procedures as Sarah's fuel ran out during her final approach. The Mustang's engine coughed once, then died completely, leaving her to glide the powerless aircraft onto the runway, using only her momentum and flying skills. The landing was rough, but successful, with the aircraft rolling to a stop just yards from where General Hayes and his team waited in anxious silence. Sarah climbed out of the cockpit on unsteady legs, physically and emotionally exhausted from the most challenging flight of her life. General Hayes approached with a smile that conveyed both relief and admiration, extending his hand in congratulations for completing a mission that many experts had considered impossible to survive. The radar installation had been completely destroyed, clearing the way for Allied invasion forces to approach the French coast without early detection. The immediate aftermath of the mission was anticlimactic in many ways. Sarah was debriefed extensively about every aspect of the flight, providing detailed information that would help military planners understand German defensive capabilities and response patterns. However, the top-secret nature of the operation meant that her extraordinary achievement would remain classified for decades, with no public recognition or formal military honors. Within a week of the successful mission, Sarah received orders to report to a new assignment that would take advantage of her proven abilities in dangerous flying situations. She would spend the remainder of the war conducting similar deep penetration missions behind enemy lines, each one building on the experience and techniques developed during the radar installation attack. Her reputation within classified military circles grew with each successful mission, but publicly she remained invisible. 3 days after Sarah's attack on the radar installation, Operation Overlord began with a massive Allied invasion of Normandy. Landing craft and invasion fleets approached the French coast without being detected by the early warning system that would have alerted German forces to their presence hours before the attack began. Military historians would later calculate that Sarah's mission directly contributed to saving thousands of Allied lives during the crucial early hours of the invasion. After the war ended, Sarah returned to civilian life with a collection of memories that she could never share and skills that had been tested in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. She purchased a small charter flying service in Colorado, where she spent the next 40 years providing flight instruction and scenic tours to tourists who had no idea they were flying with someone who had conducted some of the most dangerous missions in military aviation history. General Hayes remained in contact with Sarah for many years after the war, occasionally visiting her charter service when his travels brought him through Colorado. He would later write in his classified memoirs that she possessed the rarest combination of technical flying skills and personal courage that he had encountered in decades of military service. He credited her willingness to attempt the impossible with changing the course of the war in Europe. The truth about Sarah's wartime missions remained classified until 1994, when government documents from the era were finally declassified and made available to researchers. Historians studying the period were amazed to discover the extent to which critical military operations had depended on pilots whose names appeared in no official records, and whose contributions had been deliberately hidden from public knowledge. When journalists finally tracked down Sarah in 1995, she was 73 years old and still flying occasionally, though she had officially retired from the charter service business. The media attention surprised her, as she had assumed her wartime experiences would remain secret forever. She granted a few interviews, but declined most requests for detailed information about her missions, saying simply that she had been fortunate to serve her country when her particular skills were needed. Sarah passed away peacefully in 2003, surrounded by family members who had only recently learned about their grandmother's extraordinary wartime service. Her funeral was attended by dozens of former military officers and government officials who had worked with her during and after the war. General Hayes, then 91 years old, delivered a eulogy that publicly revealed for the first time the full extent of Sarah's contributions to the Allied victory in Europe. Today, Sarah's story serves as a reminder that heroism often comes from unexpected sources and that personal redemption is possible even after serious mistakes. The young woman who was banned from military service for reckless flying became one of the war's most valuable assets precisely because her willingness to take extreme risks made her capable of missions that others couldn't even contemplate attempting. Her legacy lives on in the countless lives that were saved because she was brave enough to fly when others said it was impossible.